This story was sent to me by a subscriber, and when I read it, I couldn't breathe for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to tell it to you the way she told it to me. Actually, I'm going to tell it like it happened to me, because honestly, after reading her words so many times, it feels like I lived through it myself. It started at a funeral, my husband Robert's funeral. And the strange thing wasn't the silence in the room. It wasn't the flowers or the polished wood or the people whispering behind me. The strange thing was what my 11-year-old grandson did. Lucas walked up to me while I was standing next to the casket, and without looking at me, he slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. He whispered something so quiet I almost missed it. "Grandpa told me to give this to you if he didn't wake up." My hands were already shaking before I opened it, and when I read the first line, my whole body went cold. It said, "Grandma, don't trust Dad." Pay attention to that detail because it's going to matter later. I folded the note quickly and shoved it deep into my purse before anyone could see. My fingers were trembling as I closed the clasp. And then I heard Daniel's voice behind me. "Mom, you should sit down." I turned slowly. My son stood there in a perfectly pressed dark suit, his expression somewhere between grief and control. Daniel had always been good at looking composed. Even as a kid, he could switch his emotions on and off like a light. He placed his hand on my elbow and guided me to the front pew. And look, part of me wasn't acting. Losing Robert after 42 years together had left me feeling like someone had pulled half the oxygen out of the world. Everything sounded distant, muffled, like voices underwater. But another part of me, a part I didn't even know existed until that moment, had become completely alert. Because Robert's words kept echoing. "Don't trust Dad, my son, my own son." The service started. The minister talked about Robert's generosity, about the construction company he built from nothing, about the summers he coached Daniel's Little League team while working 14-hour days. I tried to listen. I really did. But I kept noticing things, small things. Daniel kept checking his watch. Laura, my daughter, sat stiffly, her eyes moving between Daniel and me, like she was following a conversation no one else could hear. Ethan, Laura's husband, sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight. Every few minutes, the three of them would exchange quick looks. Not sad looks, nervous ones. And every time I shifted in my seat or opened my purse for a tissue, Daniel's eyes snapped immediately to my hands. Like he was watching for something. Like he was afraid of what I might pull out. I didn't know it at the time, but what Robert had discovered before he died was big enough to destroy our family. The service ended. People lined up to say goodbye to Robert one last time. Daniel walked with me toward the casket. For a moment, everything else disappeared. I touched the edge of the wood. Robert looked peaceful, too peaceful. He had never been still a day in his life. Then Daniel's hand tightened on my shoulder. "We should head outside, Mom. The cars are waiting." As we turned away, I caught sight of Lucas standing near the back of the room. He was staring at me. When our eyes met, he looked down at the floor fast, the same way he had after handing me the note. A knot formed in my chest. After the burial, Daniel stayed close, too close. "Why don't you come stay at our place tonight?" he said. Laura agreed immediately. Margaret, Daniel's wife, nodded. "We've already made up the guest room." Already. That word stuck. I hadn't told anyone where I planned to sleep. I think I'd rather be in my own bed, I said carefully. Daniel frowned. It's not safe, Mom. Not safe. Why would my own house not be safe? He hesitated, then said, for emotional reasons. Laura laughed softly, smoothing things over. He just means it'll be lonely. Then Laura leaned close and asked me something strange. Do you still have Dad's office keys? I blinked. Yes. Good, she said, the same word she'd used earlier, and then she glanced toward Daniel before stepping back. Here's the thing. If I hadn't read that note, I would have gone with them. I would have smiled and let my son take care of everything. I would have signed whatever he put in front of me, and I would have lost everything Robert spent his life building. But I had read the note, and the note said one more thing I haven't told you yet. It said to call Arthur Bennett, Robert's lawyer, his oldest friend. At the cemetery, while everyone was distracted, I borrowed a neighbor's phone and made the call. Arthur answered on the third ring. When I told him who I was, his voice changed instantly. Christine, are you all right? He already knew. Robert had told him something serious. Arthur said Robert had come to see him 3 days before he died. Robert was worried, deeply worried. He believed someone was trying to rush him into signing certain documents. And then Arthur said something that made my blood run cold. Your husband told me that if anything happened to him suddenly, you might be in danger of being pressured. Pressured to sign things I didn't understand. And then he said, whatever you do, do not go home with Daniel. The exact same warning from the note. I went to the reception. I acted normal. I smiled. I hugged people. I thanked them for their kind words. And the whole time, Daniel, Laura, and Ethan circled around me like a slow-moving net. Then Daniel made his move. There's something we should talk about, he said. Just a few small things regarding Dad's affairs. Laura nodded. It's just a formality. Ethan added, just to keep things running. Their explanations overlapped, almost rehearsed, and they wanted me to sign that night. I said no. I said I wasn't thinking clearly. I said tomorrow. Daniel's jaw tightened. Tomorrow might be too late. Those words slipped out before he could stop them, and the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. That night I met Arthur at a small diner Robert used to visit, Marlowe's Diner, the kind of place you drive past without noticing. Arthur was already waiting. He had a briefcase, and inside that briefcase was the truth. You're not ready for what comes next. Arthur showed me a document called an Emergency Authority Transfer Agreement. It looked like temporary paperwork to keep the company running, but hidden in paragraph 4 was a clause that said the temporary authority could not be revoked without approval from the acting director, Daniel. It wasn't temporary at all. It was permanent control, disguised as protection. And that wasn't the worst part. Arthur showed me an acquisition contract. A private equity firm called Horizon Equity Group was set to buy Robert's company for $280 million. The deal required my signature as controlling shareholder. If I had signed those papers at the reception, Daniel would have gained legal control, and within days the entire company would have been sold. Wait, it gets worse. Arthur's investigator, a former Chicago detective named Samuel Ortiz, traced the ownership of Horizon Equity Group. It wasn't an outside buyer. It was partially owned by Ethan Parker, Laura's husband, and the remaining investors were shell companies connected to Daniel. They weren't helping investors buy the company. They were the investors. They were going to buy Robert's company from themselves, using my signature, using everything Robert built. And Robert? Robert had figured it out weeks before he died. He installed security cameras. He hid voice recorders in his study. He captured footage of Daniel searching his desk drawers late at night. He recorded Laura sneaking into the study. He documented everything. And then there was the medication. Honestly, this is where the story gets heavy. Ortiz confirmed that Ethan had picked up Robert's heart medication from the pharmacy 4 days before Robert collapsed. The dosage had been doubled. Robert never changed his dosage. His doctors never authorized it. Someone wanted Robert weak, confused, vulnerable enough to sign. They didn't need to kill him. They just needed him unable to fight back. And what I didn't understand back then was that Robert had been carrying all of this alone, fighting a battle inside his own family, trying to protect me, trying to protect his company, and it still cost him his life. But Robert did something brilliant. Years earlier, without telling Daniel, he transferred the majority controlling interest of the company into a joint trust, and the primary controlling shareholder listed on that document was me, Christine Eleanor King. He told me it was for tax purposes. I barely read the papers. I trusted him completely. Now I understood. He wasn't planning for retirement. He was building a wall around me. The morning after the funeral, Daniel came to the house, right on schedule. He brought his briefcase. He brought the paperwork. He sat across from me at the coffee table and started explaining the documents like I was a child. And that's when everything fell apart, for him. I slid the acquisition agreement across the table. His face went white. "Where did you get this?" I didn't answer. I showed him the trust document next. He stared at it like the paper might catch fire. "Dad never told me about this." "That was intentional," I said. Then I told him I knew about Horizon Equity, about the shell companies, about Ethan's involvement, about the security footage, about the pharmacy records, about all of it. Daniel's composure cracked completely. He went from shock to denial to anger in under a minute. "You're being manipulated," he said. "You don't understand what you're saying." But I understood perfectly. For the first time in my life, my son looked at me and realized I wasn't the person he thought I was. I wasn't a grieving widow who would sign anything put in front of her. I was the woman Robert King had spent 42 years preparing for exactly this moment. "You just started a war," Daniel said as he slammed the front door behind him. But he was wrong. The war was already over. He just didn't know it yet. Later that morning, I received a text from Margaret, Daniel's wife. It said, "Thank you for protecting Lucas." I wrote back, "Thank you for returning the folder." Because it was Margaret who had found the missing documents Daniel had taken from Robert's desk. Margaret who left them on my porch in the middle of the night. Margaret who chose her son's future over her husband's greed. You know what surprised me the most? It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the money or the forged signatures or the doubled medication. It was Lucas, an 11-year-old boy who heard the arguments, who watched the adults around him lie, and who chose to do the right thing anyway. He carried that note in his pocket probably for weeks, waiting, hoping he'd never have to use it. And when the moment came, he didn't hesitate. I went to Robert's grave that morning. I placed white lilies beside his headstone. The grass was still wet from the rain. The sun had finally broken through. And I said the words I'd been holding inside since the funeral. I'm going to protect what you built. The wind shifted, almost like an answer. Robert didn't leave me alone. He left me prepared. And that's the difference between someone who loves you and someone who just wants something from you. The people who love you prepare you for the storm. The others just wait for it to hit so they can pick through the wreckage. Sometimes the greatest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who sit at your dinner table, the ones who call you mom, the ones who hug you at funerals while their hands are already reaching for what you have. But here's what I've learned. Integrity doesn't come from age or money or power. It comes from character. And sometimes the person with the most character in the room is the smallest one there. If this story moved you, leave a like. Seriously, it helps me more than you know to keep bringing these stories to you every week. And tell me in the comments, would you have trusted that note? Because I almost didn't, and that nearly cost me everything. If you've ever faced betrayal from someone you loved, from someone you never expected, I want to hear about it. I read every single comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it, because next week there's a new story, and honestly, some of them are even heavier than this one.